Hello and welcome to the fifth devlog of a mobile zombie shooter called Meeting Joe. In this fifth devlog we are talking about a continuation from the last devlog where I talked about the experience of the current prototype. And the experience of the current prototype is that there are four main issues. It's hard to hit the enemies, it's hard to avoid the enemies, the shooting mechanic isn't fun, and the overall pacing doesn't feel very right. In the last devlog I also went into some of the causes and some of the categorizations of what I think the solutions would be. I spent about 12 to 16 hours painfully working through some of those problems. And this devlog focuses more on how I focused on the first two experiences, that it's hard to hit the enemies and avoid the enemies. So we will go into fixing some of those clunky rotation mechanics, the feeling of inaccurate aim, there's no crosshair, and it's overall just an inaccurate movement. And the reason why I decided to focus so much time and frustration over those two topics is in the context of game loops, on which there's billions of videos. I'm not going into game loops or trying to define them, but in the overall context of core game loops, the movement is what the player will do on a second-by-second basis. It's what the player will be doing the majority of the time, similar to the movement mechanic in some other great games like FPS shooters or overall top-down shooters or some other genres. It's just the core of getting that right? If it doesn't feel like it's fun to move around, to move, to rotate, to dodge, then after a minute the player will put down the game. So fixing anything that relates to those second-by-second experiences that the player has, which happens to be the movement, the dodging, the shooting, the aiming, is absolutely crucial, because that's what everything else will revolve around, right? If there's a good secondary game loop, it won't matter if the core game loop is absolute horrible. So the big question then remained of how, what is clunky rotation? What does it mean to not hit the enemies or have good aim? What does a good crosshair look like that doesn't look completely out of place? And also, how can I just define some of the speed settings to make it a bit more interesting? So I spent a bit of time using the prototype to play around with the rotation settings and also with the movement speed. So I implemented a mechanic where I can adjust in-game through two sliders the movement speed and the rotation, see how it feels, to come up with a number, to see what is a good movement speed in relation to the zombies or any other enemy. And I found a sweet spot in about 40% higher movement speed than the zombies. So I found a good number that I can use that feels a bit realistic, but also allows a good quick movement running away, so that you don't have to rely on shooting every time. So that 40% percentage was the outcome of the, I guess, first level of prototype iteration of finding a good movement speed. The bigger topic, which was the most frustrating thing in my entire life, was working through a good dynamic way of handling the rotation, which is the right joystick for the movement. Sorry, not for the movement, just for the rotation, and which essentially determines how good and responsive is it to aim the enemy and successfully, shoot at the right target. Initially, I tried just the standard, whatever Unity implements for the standard input system and how the joystick speed is handling the rotation. I adjusted it with some random variables, but again, it didn't really feel responsive. And the problem that created this feeling of it not feeling very responsive, the whole rotation, is that it was very linear. So you could only rotate in a set speed. So if there was a low speed for the rotation, the overall rotation would take way too long. So it would be good to aim very precisely at a short distance, but if you quickly had to turn around to a different angle because there's a spawn location down there and you need to aim there, you would look like an idiot trying to rotate, and it'd take like 5 minutes. So the main issue was that if the setting is too high, you can rotate quickly, but if it's too low, you rotate too slowly and you can't turn around. So that trying to solve this took most time, and I ended up writing a custom script just for that right joystick, and I tried different things, but the first thing I tried to implement was to tie the rotation speed to the movement. So if the player is moving, then you probably need a more quicker rotation speed, so you can roughly lock in which direction you're looking and you want to shoot. And then if you stop pressing the left joystick, you would then reduce the rotation speed to 50%, so you have more accurate aim, which sounded like the smartest idea ever, but it's still horrible because it's, yeah, on the downside, it means that you have to move if you want to flip around to a different angle, and that's just horrible. So it incentivizes movement, but movement isn't the key thing all the time. So that idea was horrible, and tossed it out and replaced it with, like I mentioned, a custom script where I wanted to tie the speed or the magnitude of the person using his right thumb for the right joystick, and tie that dynamic movement to the rotation. So if the player moves very quickly, the thumb on the right joystick, then the player would rotate quickly. And if he does it very slowly, then there's a very slow rotation. So you can determine through how quickly you swish around the movement speed, which sounded good. And I think it's also the mechanic that I will go for, but it was just horrible. I mean, trying to find any documentation or examples or existing code snippets that use it is absolutely impossible. And big shout out to ChatGPT, who helped me figure out some rough way how to go about it. And yeah, like I mentioned, it took ages to go through it. And I found a good sweet spot in terms of the movement speed, as I mentioned, and also of the rotation speed. And then in combination with being a bit more dynamic of how quickly you swoop around, tying it to good aim, that led to really good results. So I'm okay. I'm not super happy, but it's good enough. It's, you know, we went from the movement and the aim being a fun of 0.1 to being like a 4 maybe on a scale of 10. So good progress, but it's not the end. That was kind of everything, I believe, on the movement. The other thing, which was the quickest fix I've ever done in my life, I think, is solving the problem of not being able to hit the enemies. Part of it was, of course, relating to the rotation speed and the rotation dynamics, but a big part of it is also that there was no visual indicator. And in the game jam versions that I had of this game, I just solved it by having a crosshair. So the mouse cursor would be a crosshair, and then you can aim, which you obviously can't do in a mobile game. But I also did want to have a straight line or some kind of dot in front of the player that indicates where you would shoot. That just felt out of place. But I then remembered our good friend Line Renderer and just raycasting, and I experimented with just shooting a raycast from the fire point straight out in the direction the player's looking, and then whenever it hits a collider, it draws a line renderer from the point of origin to that point, which not only happened to look like a laser pointer, which is quite convenient, but it also solved the secondary problem that I didn't know how to fix best, because the core mechanic of this game is that the bullets bounce off objects and you know, stuff like walls and cars. So you have to be careful of dodging the zombies, but also your own bullets. And because you spawn more and more bullets, the more enemies you kill, it gets increasingly important to not randomly shoot stuff that then bounces off and kills you. And the player doesn't really have that experiences when he or she plays a few times which objects might lead to bouncing off bullets, right? If it's a car, you know, does it bounce off a small car or a big car? Does it bounce off a garbage can or not? You have no idea of knowing. So this line renderer perfectly solved that problem, because you would see where the line is, you know, if the laser pointer is obviously not going through the object, you know that if you shoot, the bullets will bounce back. So it perfectly solved all of the problems with you know, aiming better, but also avoiding accidental frustration by randomly shooting objects just because you don't know that you can't shoot through them. So that's overall pretty good. So I think I solved the clunky rotation for now. I solved the inaccurate aim. I solved the lack of crosshair, fixed a bit of movement speed. I played around a little bit with the spawning speed of enemies, but not really. And I tried to implement the same enemy types that I've had in this other prototype, just to see how it feels if you face those enemy types with the new movement mechanics. But I think it's better to have a specific devlog just on the enemy types, the enemy mechanics. I'm not 100% happy with it yet, but like I said, I'm more than happy to put this movement to rest for now. I feel like I need a bit of a weekend after this horrible experience, but yeah, let's stay tuned and see you guys in the next one. Bye.